Hey everybody out there, this is Seto, and today for you guys we're going to talk about a topic that is very interesting to talk about in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! It's a topic that has been discussed over the last couple of years, I guess you could say the last year to 2 years now in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And it's something I want to talk about as well, my thoughts on it. And that is, have boss monsters, are they no longer a thing in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Now, let's define a boss monster in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! When I think of a boss monster, pretty much, I think of a monster that is, it's the head of the archetype. It's the main focus. It's a big monster that once you bring that out, it can win you duels, win you games. It's very integral to the main power play of the deck. It's what the deck does. Granted, I guess you could say that some decks have a lot of boss monsters. A good example of this would be Light Swarms. They have multiple different types of boss monsters depending upon the build you make. I remember back in the day, Twilight Swarm, you had your JDs, your Chaos Sorcerer, BLS was unbanned and at one at the time. People ran Dark Arm Dragon in that deck even because it was a mixture of lights and darks. So depending upon the deck, they can have multiple boss monsters or just one main one, like maybe for agents, or fairies, fairy agent builds, it was Master Hyperion. For Dark Worlds, it's Grapha. Things of this nature. Gravekeepers have gone through many different incarnations of so-called boss monsters. Granted, some of them are a little bit better than others, I feel like, but beside the point. That's what I'm trying to say. That's my definition of a boss monster. A monster that's very powerful, a monster that can win you games, and it's very integral part of the deck, and it's integral to the main power play of the deck. Granted, I feel like it can be archetype specific, but not always, like in the case of BLS. So, boss monsters have always been around in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Be it the original boss monsters, I guess you could say, quote unquote, of the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! Were Blue Eyes White Dragon, Summon Skull, Dark Magician, Judge Man maybe, and I'm talking like back in the day, back in the Yu-Gi and Seto Kaiba structure deck days. Summon Skull was the boss monster of the deck. It was the biggest monster, the most powerful monster to get out and wreck face. Fast forward a couple of years after that, maybe 2-3 years, you had Chaos Swarm, or Chaos, what it is known, where you had boss monsters like BLS, Chaos Emperor Dragon, and you had D-Mock, I guess you could say. So pretty much, you had those boss monsters incarnation. Fast forward a little bit further down the road, we see, I guess you could say, instead of being in the main deck all the time, as boss monsters were for the early part of Yu-Gi-Oh's history especially, you start to see it take on the form of the extra deck, for example. Granted, at the same time, we're talking about Light Swarms when JD came out and things like that, but that was more in the 5Ds era. But still, you see boss monsters starting to take on a form which is more of something that takes on now, where the boss monster is not always in the main deck. It can be in the extra deck. So, as the 5Ds era comes around, you start to see this same trend. Still in the main deck, things like Hyperion, things like JD, things like Dark Arm, which was late GX era, but at the same time you still start to see this thing in the, it doesn't always have to be in the main deck, it could be the extra deck. And by the time the Zexal era rolls around, and even now going into the Arc V era, Arc 5 era, you actually start to notice that it's not always in the main deck. A lot of times now, boss monsters are in the extra deck. A prime example of this is Go Go Power Rangers, what are they called, Mechatronics? I call it the Megazord for the archetype, what is it called off the top of my head? Oh gosh, not Morphtronics. That's a different archetype altogether. But you know what archetype I'm talking about right now. Super Quantums, excuse me. They're a Megazord, is what I call it, which in the extra deck is pretty much like a Towers. It's a big monster that they bring out. But it's a very powerful boss monster. But you go back to a year ago, or not even a year ago, 6 months ago, people were running Towers Turbo, which was a main deck boss monster. But let's talk about this and bring this topic together now. There's a lot of different, a boss monster is a big monster. But I feel like now in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh, it's not all about who has the biggest monster in the the game. You may have a big monster, but it's like that old saying goes, the bigger you are, the harder you fall. Definitely that's the saying, I feel like, in the same way of Yu-Gi-Oh context. It's not all about the big beat stick monster. That little monster with that little good effect can take down that big monster because it may have a broken effect. Just look at how many good monsters have come out in the last, just the last year, that is. They may be low in attack, they may not be that, impressive on the stat line, but their effects are very, very good. And they can take down those big monsters. Look, there's just so many things now. And I feel like also, at the same time, we're and this started in the 5Ds era, and definitely hit home in the Zexals era. Not every deck needs a boss monster. You can have decks that, especially in this rank 4 era that we've been living for the last year or so, you don't need a boss monster. Your boss monster, you may have a card that's very good, it's archetype specific, it's very awesome, that is in your extra deck or your main deck. But your deck may be more integral into pushing out multiple good cards that can deal with multiple situations. A good example of this is any rank 4 deck out there, really. They don't just rely upon one single rank 4. They rely upon a plethora of rank 4s to combat what their opponent's doing, to get around problems, to set up roadblocks for their opponent to get over, and things of that nature. They don't just focus on one thing. So, are boss monsters dead in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh? No, I don't feel like they're completely dead. I feel like they're not in the main deck as much as they were in past eras in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! You still see this from time to time, though still, like Towers before he got banned. But you see it more in the extra deck. And decks nowadays are not created, I feel like, and this is a personal thing me saying here, are not created to be focused around one certain monster. They're created to be doing multiple different things to some extent, or have one main set goal in mind. Like, for example, this deck is made to make rank 4, so let's use Constellars, for example. Not Constellars, Stellar Knights, for example. That deck is geared to making rank 4s consistently and precisely. It may make a lot of different rank 4s, but it's geared towards making a lot of rank 4s. Just like, I guess you could say, maybe the, excuse me, I guess you say Monarchs or Mega Monarchs or whatever, variation you play of Monarchs, is made for tribute summoning. Granted, it depends upon your build, but most Monarch builds are geared to tribute summon efficiently, effectively, come back from maybe your opponent taking a very savage beating from your opponent, and still be able to persevere and overcome. That's what I feel like. So boss monsters are still a thing in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! I personally feel like this. Some decks more so than others, but not every deck. But there's a good chunk of decks out there that do still focus around boss monsters, I feel like. So boss monsters, I don't feel, are dead. They've just taken on different incarnations of themselves and different forms, and they're not in every deck like they used to be back in the day, I guess you could say. Because I remember back in the day, people make it a joke nowadays, but there was a time in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh! And this happened after the Chaos format back in 2000 and what was it, 4 or 5, I forget, my brain deceives me at the moment, where people you played a lot of lights and darks in your deck because you wanted to put BLS in your deck, or because BLS was that good of a card. And when Dark Armed Dragon was out, people just played a lot of darks or dark monsters in their deck, Twilight Swarm, because Dark Armed Dragon was that good. So that's what I'm trying to say here. Sometimes that boss monster or that generic card is that good that you actually put other cards in the deck just to play it. And it's still true to this day with different decks. But yes, tell me what you think, guys. Do you think boss monsters are dead in the game of Yu-Gi-Oh? Do you think they've taken on different forms? What's your thought on the topic? And until next time, guys, take care. Have fun dueling. Good luck dueling. And I'll see all you guys next time. Take care, everybody.